Hi, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter. There are a lot of people obsessed with Susan Carland's hair, and I'm one of them. I've known Susan for several years, and I've been to her house for dinner. We've co-hosted podcasts together. I've met her daughter and her son, who are now 15 and 11, and I've even worked with her husband, Gold Logie winner Waleed Ali, on the project. And yet, I've never seen her hair. This has become a bit of a running joke between us. I sometimes ask her to describe it or send me a photo of it, which doesn't sound creepy at all. We laugh about it all the time, and I can assure you that Susan Carland laughs about a variety of topics, even sometimes her religion. She's a huge amount of fun to be around. A Muslim woman who wears a headscarf, laughing? Some people find this unexpected, along with so many things we discuss in this interview. It's going to surprise people who think they know Susan's life just by looking at her or passing her in the street, because Susan Carland is a devout Muslim woman, a religion she converted to from Christianity when she was a teenager. And when she converted, she chose to wear hijab, or a headscarf, something that shocked and baffled some members of her own family. But while Susan can joke about her hair and her hijab, many people don't find it funny at all. They find it sad or sexist or outrageous or offensive or un-Australian, even though she's 7th generation Australian. Many people assume being a Muslim woman who wears a hijab means that she is repressed and distressed, the victim of a religion that appears to oppress women. This belief is pretty understandable. The depiction of Islam in the media tends to focus on terrorism, female genital mutilation, and the fact that women in some Muslim countries face the death penalty for being raped, and in other Muslim countries are banned from driving cars or showing any part of their body or face in public, or even leaving the house unless accompanied by a man. The idea of being a Muslim and a feminist seems, from the outside, like an impossible contradiction. Susan disagrees. She disagrees so strongly, in fact, that she's written a book about feminism and Islam called Fighting Hislam, Women, Faith and Sexism. In this book, she argues that there are Muslim women who are fighting for gender equality inside their faith, and that being Muslim and a feminist aren't always mutually exclusive. This is a pretty controversial position to take. Just ask Yasmin Abdelmajid. Remember earlier this year when she ignited a firestorm of commentary and abuse when she appeared on Q&A and declared this?
Excuse me, Islam to me is the most feminist religion.
Soon after that controversy, I actually interviewed Yasmin for No Filter. And when I asked her about her comments, she became angry and the interview fell apart. We chose not to broadcast it. So I'm going to be honest. This interview with Susan was a little bit fraught because of the potential landmines involved, and I felt nervous about it. So much so that it's the first interview I've ever done while playing with a fidget spinner. I didn't want to make the same mistakes I did with the Yasmin interview, so before we began, I laid out some ground rules for Susan and for me. Here she is, Susan Carland. Welcome, Susan Carland.
Thank you, Mia Friedman.
It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's been a long time since I've seen you in the flesh.
It has.
It was a couple of years ago.
I've missed you. Yeah. I see you. No, I see you. I can't tell how much I see you actually and how much I see you on television, and I just get the things confused. But we are friends. Yes. I've been to your house.
Yes, you've had dinner at my house. Yes,
yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Where I helpfully brought a bottle of wine, I think.
No, I don't think you brought wine.
Maybe I thought about bringing wine.
No, you were the dream guest.
Was I?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I remember, one of the things I remember most about that is when you were coming, I said, so this is our address, and if you want to take the train, this is the stop you get off at. And you wrote back and said, I love that you think I'm the kind of person that would take the train.
I'm like, what's a train? I want to lay down some ground rules for today.
I'm ready.
You ready?
I'm ready.
You are going to give me the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
That I come in peace,
yes,
and in good faith, but I will probably say some things that are ignorant. I loved what you said about, you have to deal with a lot of arrogance and ignorance when it comes to your faith. I will be guaranteed to provide one, but hopefully not the other. And you will also challenge me.
Okay.
When I say things that you say, well, that's wrong, or that's arrogant, or that's not okay.
Okay. Yep.
Okay? Is that
Sounds
a deal?
good. Yep.
Okay. Because I've had experiences before where I've asked questions because I'm curious and I genuinely don't understand, and they have been misinterpreted as being either hostile or arrogant or whatever. But your book, Fighting Hislam, Muslim Women and Sexism, you call it a minefield of unflappable certainty and indignation from all corners.
God, did I say that?
Yes, and you said it was born of frustration.
Yes, it was.
Actually an adaptation of your PhD.
Yes.
Why did you choose such an easy topic?
It was something I was genuinely interested in, and I felt like, it's funny. I remember when I was writing my PhD and saying to someone, I'm really worried people will stop talking about Muslim women and this will be published and no one will care. And then I realised, we're going to be talking about this forever. So, and I think that's part of it, is that this conversation is always happening. People are always talking about Muslim women and what do they mean and what are their rights and are they oppressed and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's talking over them. Not many people seem to be talking to them. And certainly in this area of fighting sexism, there's a lot of talk about sexism within the Muslim community, and then it's just assumed or even said, oh, well, Muslim women are just passively acquiescing to it, or they even love it. There doesn't seem to be any awareness that Muslim women have always been pushing back against this sexism. And we're just not talking about that.
You start your book talking about going to a printing place to collect the printout of your PhD.
Yes.
And it becomes a great metaphor for what you're talking about in the book. Can you just explain what happened?
Yeah, so I went to pick up my PhD and I was so happy. And, as you said, my PhD was all about the way Muslim women fight sexism within the Muslim community particularly. And I went to pick up my thesis and the guy who worked there said, oh, what's your thesis on? And I just started by saying, it's on Muslim women. And before I could even finish, he just launched into this diatribe about female genital mutilation. And he just went on and on and on. I remember, it was just a monologue. He had no interest in what I had to say. And I remember thinking, how perfectly representative that I'm just here to pick up my PhD on Muslim women fighting sexism, and this dude feels he can just launch into this speech that has nothing to do with me or even what I wrote my thesis on. And it was this sort of sense of entitlement. Let me tell you, woman, what it's all about. And that sort of thing happens a lot.
You also talk about a conversation with a well-known male journalist who you don't name, but you bump into him at an industry function and you reluctantly tell him what your PhD thesis is about.
Yes.
And his reaction.
Yeah, he was just gobsmacked. Literally by the end of it, no words could come out of his mouth when I said, oh, well, I'm looking at the way Muslim women fight sexism. And he's like, oh, that's dangerous waters. And I said, well, not really. The women have been great to talk to. They're really eager to tell their stories. And he said, but do their husbands know and allow this? And I said, well, actually, a lot of the women said their husbands were their biggest supporters. And he goes, but isn't this apostasy? and I said, no, actually, this is...
And remind me what apostasy is.
Apostasy isn't them fighting sexism, taking themselves outside of their religion. Like, apostasy is when you
leave...
Like
heresy?
Yeah, but it's you've actively taken yourself outside of your faith. So he thought that a Muslim woman fighting sexism was in and of itself an act of apostasy. And he could not compute that, first of all, women like this existed. Second of all, that enough existed for me to fill a PhD with them.
When Yasmin went on Q&A and said that, and it's been widely misquoted as her saying, Islam is the most feminist religion. What she said is, Islam is the most feminist religion to me. And I missed that, along with a lot of other people. Did your heart sink when that happened, or what? How did you feel when you watched that play out?
I mean, I felt a lot of things. Certainly, in the subsequent backlash, I just felt real sadness for Yasmin, and frustrated and upset at the unfairness of it all. But I think watching that whole conversation was so indicative of how this conversation is playing out. You know, Jackie Lambie's rage and anger at her and fighting back, and Yasmin trying to say what she says. And it was just like everyone was just talking past each other. No one really seemed to understand where the other person was coming from, or could understand where the other person might be getting their ideas. And it became a shouting match. And so often, I think, with this conversation, but with so much more in our society, we confuse argument for debate. And that wasn't a debate, that was an argument. And with this topic...
From both of them, to be fair. They were both shouting at each other. And I think they both... I happened to interview them both in the couple of weeks afterwards, and they both said they regretted the way it unfolded.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it did either of them any favours. And it was, you know, I guess just a spur of the moment or whatever. But to me, I watched it and thought this is just so indicative that of both sides, where everyone's sort of yelling past each other and there's no real conversation or understanding where the other side's coming from.
In your book and your thesis, you speak to a number of who are quite diverse from North America and from Australia, who are different ages, who are fighting sexism in their religion in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you to start off with, what is the difference between culture and religion?
That's a really good question, and it's a really big one.
And do we get it confused?
Yeah, I think everybody does in every context, but particularly with Islam. So, and a lot of the women I interviewed spoke about this, saying, you know, the sexism that I'm experiencing in this situation, this is not my religion. In fact, my religion actively opposes this, but it's the culture of the community that it's come from. You've got to remember that if you ever wonder how does culture influence religion, look at the way, say, Indonesian Islam is practiced compared to, say, Somali Islam or Saudi Islam or Islam in Turkey. They're very different.
Are they?
Yeah, really different.
In what ways are they different?
Well, I mean, it's a big part of it has to do with the way how much influence Islam or people's interpretations of Sharia impacts on a country's laws. So different countries will use different aspects of Sharia as part of their law. Often in family law is a big one. But that's in different ways, and it's been interpreted in different ways in different countries, which is why you have a country like Saudi where women aren't allowed to drive, compared to a country like Indonesia where it wouldn't even enter their heads that a woman couldn't drive. They're both ostensibly, I'm sorry, it was a very early flight.
Ostensibly. That's okay. I didn't catch an early flight and I don't even know what you're talking about. I know ostentatiously.
Ostensibly. Let's just forget that. They're both at face value.
Yes. I can deal with that. But are they interpretations of the same religious text?
Yeah, definitely. And
the Quran.
But everything else that's come with it, different scholars' way of interpreting things that need to be literal or metaphorical, things that were relevant then but aren't necessarily relevant now. What does this rule look like in a modern context? It's all permeated. So one really interesting example is a woman that I interviewed. She's amazing, a total badass. She lives in North America, but she's a Pakistani woman, expert in law. And she wanted to address there's a law in Pakistan where women can be punished for adultery if they're raped. So if they're a victim of rape, they'll be punished for adultery.
It's considered adultery.
Right. And that's part of the legal system there. And she as a woman and as a lawyer said, you know, I could go in and make these outside arguments about, well, this is wrong according to universal human rights and blah, blah, blah. But I know if I say that, they're going to double down on their culture and then going to say, no, this is our culture. How dare you as an outsider come in with your Western feminism, blah, blah, blah. She said, I can make exactly the same arguments using Sharia to justify what I'm saying and go in and say, do you realize what you're doing is against Islam? By having this rule, it is the antithesis of what our religion teaches. Here is a systematic list of why. And that will be something that they will take on board and absorb and then use that to change the laws.
And has it? Or she's in the process?
Yeah, she's in the process of it. And she was really, she was instrumental in, do you remember that awful case of Amina Lawal, the Nigerian woman who was, so she participated
Remind
in
me
that.
what that was
So
again.
she was a woman who was going to be stoned for adultery in Nigeria because she was pregnant out of wedlock, and that was seen as evidence. Well, if you're pregnant out of wedlock, then you must have had sex out of wedlock, therefore you committed adultery, therefore we have to punish you. And it was a similar situation where she was saying, I understand completely the external agitation to try to to fight this and stop this. But we don't want to do it in a way that will make them double down on what they're doing. Give them an argument that they will listen to. Let's use the Sharia to tell them why this is wrong instead of coming in with outside forces, because especially communities or countries or groups that feel these outside influences telling us what to do, how dare they? We're going to stick even harder to what we want to do. Give them something that they will listen to and give them a religious argument.
How can you have a religious text that some people can interpret in this way, that women should be stoned, women should have their genitals mutilated, women can't drive, and it's always women?
Yeah.
How can that all come from the same text?
I know, it is remarkable, isn't it? That, if there's a saying that Muslims say that you don't read the Quran reads you. And what that is what you bring to a text, you will take out of it, especially a religious text, and all religious texts have bits that are metaphorical and are literal, and which is which and what was for then and what's now and what does this really mean and all that.
What does it mean in 2017?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why you can have ISIS read the Quran, and you can also have the Persian Sufi poet Rumi read the same Quran and come away with completely different understandings and readings and interpretations for living. Now, that's not to say that every interpretation is totally acceptable and, say whatever you want. There are boundaries, but this has always been something that has existed within Islam and probably within many other traditions as well, where you can get, like Westboro Baptists will read the Bible and go, I think God wants us to go and picket the funerals of these people because this is what God wants and he hates fags and all this horrible stuff that they say. And then you get other, gentle, beautiful, loving Christians say, I read the same Bible. I do not know how you can come up with this interpretation. Now, why is it always sexist? Is because religion is a social institution, and sadly, when people come to events, we often see a sexist lens put over it. And particularly if people come with sexism in their hearts or souls or minds, they will want to find a religious justification for that, and they will want to particularly... It's very empowering, I think, for a man or even some women who want to do it to sort of say, well, it's actually God telling me that I have to oppress you. It's not me. It's actually God. See, here's the evidence in this holy book. And it can make it much harder to argue against, which is why the women in my book or my research was so interesting, because they were using exactly the same text to say, no, you don't get to do that. How dare you do that? I'm going to use the same text to make the complete opposite arguments.
And how are they going with that fight?
Pretty well, actually. I mean, I suppose how's fighting sexism going anywhere around the world?
How is the patriarchy going in the face of such fight?
What was so lovely talking to the women is just how tireless they are. They
keep
fighting.
You were going to say tired. Because it feels like it's tiring.
No, and some of them were. Some of them did seem tired and lonely and sort of worn down by the fight. But there were also some who were really funny and bolshy and just, this is, for them it wasn't just a matter of sexism is bad and I have to stamp it out. A lot of them felt this is an anathema to my faith, and it's an insult to my religion that you would dare try to say that this is what God wants. In an act of trying to protect my faith, I have to fight this as well.
Why do you think we do have this view of Muslim women as being so downtrodden? And, I mean, can you understand why those of us who aren't Muslim have that view?
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that. I think because whenever Muslim women are spoken about generally in the media, it's about the terrible things that happen in certain Muslim countries. I don't think we do any favours to the sisterhood by pretending they're not happening or that things aren't really that bad. There are some horrific things happening to Muslim women around the world, and we need to acknowledge that and fight against that and support the women who are fighting against that. So I can completely understand that, especially in a country like Australia where there's not a lot of Muslims. Like, whenever I do a talk, I ask people, how many Muslims do you think there are in Australia? And people wildly overestimate. They go,
what do people think?
What do you think?
Well, I know. I know. So you can't get me with that one. But what do people usually say
often
to you?
They'll say, maybe 20%. One woman said, maybe 50%. I said, lady, look around. There's not half of the room isn't Muslim. But I think because we're so much a part of...
It's 2%, isn't it?
It's 2%. But because we're in the media so often, it's overinflated in the public imagination.
And also because for Muslim women like yourself, you flag your faith.
Yeah, we're visible, so we stand out.
You're
so people
very visible.
See us. Maybe
I can't see the Buddhists.
Yeah, unless it's a monk. You don't see them walking around. That's it. And so I think people see us. Or the problem is because there's so few of us, most people don't have a Muslim friend or a Muslim colleague, and so the only source of information they get is from the media, and then it's the understandably horrendous stories. And so when that is just fed again and again and again that these terrible things are happening. And then I think also there is this, that women covering in the way that Muslim women do is not synonymous with liberation in the West. It's not, the two aren't married together. It's not seen as something liberationist and this is what a free woman would do. It's seen as, we look at it, Westerners look at it and think, well, her husband must be making her, her dad must make her. So that's another example of her oppression. So you've got all these different layers of imagery that people are receiving about what it means to be a Muslim woman. And then if they're not hearing anything else, that's all they've got to draw from.
Mm. You say that feminism is something the West beneficently imposes on Muslims, never something that can be indigenously theirs. To them, the only way a Muslim can be a feminist is to view Islam with the same unwavering misogyny goggles they do.
Yeah. That's something that, it's a tricky one. When I was, doing this research and writing this book, I was trying to deal with these two prongs. On the one hand, the way a lot of non-Muslims view Muslim women, and that they are oppressed, and that there can be no sense of autonomy or feminism or freedom. And then on the other hand, Muslim women dealing with, a lot of patriarchy within the faith, and particularly Muslim men, scholars or imams or just whoever, also trying to tell them what it means to be a Muslim woman and what's acceptable as a Muslim woman. So they're kind of being wedged by these two ideas and forced into this this space without. And there is no space for Muslim women to sort of talk back and go, no, hang on a minute, let me tell you what this means for me. And that often, even when they're doing it, they might say, well, actually, I choose to wear my headscarf, or I really like being Muslim. Then people go, well, that's just Stockholm syndrome. You actually don't even know what you think or what you want. You're incapable of forming a rational decision, which is such an infantilizing attitude.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter. You converted to Islam when you were about 19.
Yep.
Before you met Waleed, it must be said. I know that question pisses you off when people assume that that's why you converted.
Yeah.
But you are from a Christian family. You're seventh generation Australian?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Convict?
Yeah, probably.
Like, most of us are.
Yeah.
I think I'm convict on my mum's side too. You chose to cover at the time.
Yep.
It wasn't just enough to become Muslim. You had to really do your mother's head in by also covering, which was was it a form of rebellion for you in a way?
It actually wasn't.
My mum and I getting a tattoo?
No, my mum and I were always really close, so I didn't feel the need to rebel. I think it was just very much a matter of personal conviction.
And identity. It's like, this is who I am.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I've never really thought about identity. I guess it was just, well, this is, what I believe now, and this is what I'm going to do. And to be honest, it was probably a good thing, as hard as it was for my poor mum when I did it all at once, because I think if I'd become Muslim and then everyone had sort of gotten used to it, and then 5 years later I'm like, now I think I'm going to wear the headscarf, it would have just been all the trauma all over again. So we kind of just ripped the Band-Aid. Yeah.
Your choice, something in your faith told you or compelled you to wear a headscarf as a manifestation of that faith.
Yeah.
Is there a particular verse or passage that relates to covering up?
It's interesting, given how much attention is given to it in the Muslim community as well, in the Muslim community and it's like it's the sixth pillar of Islam for Muslim women is the headscarf.
Because it's a very loaded decision.
Yeah.
Whether to cover, whether not to cover, how much to cover, is it?
Exactly. And it's something that's never made in a vacuum. You can never make this decision in a vacuum. So there are actually only, a couple of verses in the Quran that talks about how men and women should dress, and that men and women should dress modestly, which I know in a Western context, it's not dressing modestly isn't something that's really valued or seen as important. In the Muslim community and tradition, it is. It's just something that's seen as, in modesty in behaviour and dress is.
How do you what does modesty mean to you in that context? And I guess it's subjective.
That's it, and that's why I do know some Muslim women who don't cover their hair and say, it just means dress modestly in the context in which you find yourself. In Australia, just wearing long, loose clothes is modest enough. They're very strong, and some scholars say the same thing as well, that in the context in which you find yourself, just dress modestly for that environment. So in different places, it will look different.
Modesty, though, is an inherently moral word, and it implies a level of a degree of morality. How does that sit with you?
Well, I guess
because it's a moral judgment.
But it's not a moral judgment on anybody else. For me, it's the argument is that our behaviour should always, for men and women, it's very important that we never talk about the dress codes for men, and I think that's part of the people's unease with it. It's seen that, well, this is something only women have to do, and why don't men have to do it as well? Modest dress is talked about in the same breath in the Quran for men and women. In fact, men are spoken about first. And it's because...
But for men, it's only navel to knee, isn't it?
Well, that's the absolute minimum of what should be covered. It should be covered is that they should also wear long, loose clothes. They should have a beard, and often men will cover their hair. So I've got men who, similar to the Jewish yarmulke, that will cover their hair with a cap as well. Uh-huh. Strongly encouraged, but the cap's not required. So modesty is something that's seen as valuable in every aspect of one's life, but it's not a moral judgment about anybody else. Like, the way that I dress isn't about anybody else. It's not about men. It's not about my husband or my father, and it's not about other women. It's not me looking at other people and saying, well, this is the right way to be.
But it's a judgment on yourself.
Well, the thing for me is that in Islam, everything has potential to be an act of worship to God. Everything, the mundane can always be made sacred if you have the right intention.
Cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Really?
If you have it with the right intention and go, I'm having this, thank you, God, for this nurturing coffee. I'm having this to give me the energy to do lots of great things during the day and make the world a better place, then that is suddenly drinking your coffee is an act of worship. And so the way we dress is also meant to be an act of worship. It's not meant to be about anything else. It's just meant to be about how I dress is, along with everything else, is meant to be about reminding myself of who I am and my purpose in this world. And what am I here for, and what am I trying to achieve?
But God gave you your hair and your beautiful body, and I hear you've got very beautiful hair, which I'm still obsessed with. Sometimes I try to get you to describe it to me like some weird, sexy phone call. Tell me about your hair.
What's under that scarf?
Yeah. What is it? How long is it? God made your hair. God made your beautiful body.
Yeah.
Why is covering it a worship to him, and revealing it is not a worship to him?
Well, I guess the thing is, God may have given me a perfectly perfect bottom, but I'm not going to go around with that uncovered as well. And I think every society does have some level of modesty law. I couldn't walk down the street naked here. I would be arrested. So every society or every community or group does have some level of modesty and what's appropriate to wear, particularly when you're out in the world. And so the Muslim version of that, particularly compared to the Western world now, certainly not in the past, but particularly compared to the Western world now, it does stand out just because it's so different. Like, the covering of my hair is no more important than the long sleeves that I wear, but no one really talks about my long sleeves because other people in the West wear long sleeves, so it's not as noticeable. Yeah, we have very low rates of skin cancer. I'm very sun smart.
But high rates of vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah. So you got to get out in the backyard in your bikini.
What about girls and them wearing, this idea of young girls and in Muslim schools having uniform requirements that the girls are heavily dressed, often in summer. Yeah. It's hard to play. And this sense of having to be modest. Yeah. Yeah. That's not equal to the boys.
No, and I disagree with that. It's particularly little girls. I mean, there's not even you can't even make a religious argument that they have to cover. So I don't agree with it. That's the school rules, and, so be it. And I know, like, for example, the school my daughter goes to, which isn't a Muslim school, they have some uniform policies, and, the dress has to be to the knees and whatever. And so it's those are their school policies, and that's their prerogative. I do not support that or agree with it. My kids don't.
I mean, school uniforms are inherently sexist anyway, I would argue, because in any workplace, if women had to wear skirts or dresses, any schools where girls are mandated to wear skirts or dresses, I think is not right. But this idea of, I suppose, the discomfort is this feeling that women are a temptation, that women are a constant provocation to men, and that you must cover to protect men from their baser instincts.
Yeah.
And that is how it's interpreted by some, isn't it?
Yeah. And what's, I think, important for people to know is that this is a debate that Muslim women have been arguing against Muslim men in the Muslim community. This isn't something that Muslim women don't think about or go, well, it's actually true. Like, Muslim women have been pushing back against men, and when they say stuff like this or make these arguments, you say, can you not see the problem in what you're saying and the misogyny in these arguments? How I dress is not about you. How I dress is about God. It has nothing to do with you men. If I'm at home by myself and it's time to pray, I dress in this way. I cover, even if no one else is around. So this is very much about, it's meant to be fulfill a social mobility function, which is why it makes
what
me
does that mean? A social mobility function?
Because I don't dress like this at home. Like if when I'm at home with my husband and kids, I don't cover my hair or anything like that. So, but it is this idea that when you go out into the world,
and you said if I was coming over, you did threaten to uncover, but then you made some lame excuse about having dirty hair.
Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah, I hadn't washed my hair that morning.
So in front of other women, it's fine.
Yeah, you don't have to cover in front of other women or family members.
But so then, how is that faith? And I'm not being pedantic or trying to, have a gotcha moment. But if it is about faith, why can women see you uncovered but not other men?
So it's not. It is about faith, but there is also the social function as well. So there is the social interaction part of it as well. That the way a Muslim feminist actually explained it to me is she sees it as the modesty laws for men and for women in Islam in terms of dress is meant to be about trying to desexualize the public space, so that when you are in the public space, men and women, that it is more about interacting over minds and about as individuals and about as people and personalities, and less about what people, either man or woman, look like physically. And so when I speak to some Muslim women, and I don't have the conversation with them a lot because I'm sick to death at the topic of hijab, and please don't take that personally. Please don't take that personally. But when we do talk about it, so often they'll say, for me, covering is a feminist statement. I'm sick of being in a society where women's bodies are used to sell everything from toothpaste to screwdrivers to cars, and you always see women in bikinis. Me covering is about reclaiming my body and saying, I decide who gets to see what I look like. This body isn't for consumption. It's not to sell things. This is a private space. My hijab is a mobile private space. And so when I go out in the world, I'm hoping that people will take me more for my mind and my personality, and that's their arguing, that's their reasoning for it. But like I said, it's really important that people don't ever take this as a moral judgment on someone else. And I think that's a big part of it. People seem to think when they see a Muslim woman who covers, and that's within the Muslim community as well, that Muslim women who don't cover will sometimes say, I feel like people are judging me because I don't cover. It's not about anybody else. And I think if we can just sort of let everybody be who they are, you want to wear that, go for it. And, I don't see a woman in a bikini as necessarily having any more or less morals than a woman who covers completely. It's who you are inside. And in fact, it says that in the Quran, God looks at your hearts. He doesn't look at your outer form. So in the end, you can be as covered as you want or as uncovered as you want. It's not a barometer of morality or dignity or human identity.
Is the idea of choice, and I'm not in favour of a burqa ban because I'm really conflicted by it, to be honest, because I do think we have a social contract to see each other's faces. I do think that we do in our Western society. And I am uncomfortable when I see a woman in niqab, and I know that's about me, but that's because we see a lot from each other's faces, and we read a lot from each other's faces. But this idea of being veiled or not veiled and being a choice, and I've had the experience of being on a plane with a woman and her husband and children, and she was in niqab, which is the full face covering, and I became so interested halfway through the flight. She took off, she still had her hair covered, but she took off her face veil. But we got talking. Our kids were both screaming and we were feeding each other's kids snacks. And I got talking to her husband, actually. And I said, I was so interested that your wife unveiled halfway through the flight. And he said, oh, I wish she wouldn't veil. Like, it drives me crazy. I can't stand that she veils, but she insists. And I started talking to them both about it. And it was very much, she said, it was very much her choice and it wasn't her father. And I asked all those questions. But what I would ask you is it a little bit like a woman saying, I'm having Botox, it's my choice. You were the one that said before, and I completely agree, no choice a woman makes is made in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So have you had Botox, by the way?
No, why? Do I look smooth?
Yeah, you do look really smooth.
Thanks, that's great.
If I choose to have Botox
Yes.
and go, I'm a feminist, it's my choice. Well, yes, of course, it's my choice.
Yeah.
But I'm making that choice in a society that values women for looking young.
Yep.
Your choice to cover,
Yes.
is it made in the context of a religion that says a woman is inherently tempting and needs to be covered and be more modest and dress in a way that's not required of her husband?
Well, I would argue that it's not that the religion is saying a woman is tempting. I think men who've later come and look at what those verses have said, and it doesn't say anything about a woman, you are a temptress and stop tempting men. They've just looked at the modesty laws or instructions or encouragements, ignored anything it says to men and looked at women and said, well, why could that be? It could only be about what me as a man needs, so it must be because she tempts me. So that's all overlay. That's not, the Quran doesn't say women are temptresses and must be covered to control their unbridled sexuality. So it's important that we keep that in mind. And I think you're right about
the imam who said the uncovered meat.
that was, so many Muslim women and men were just like, that's so offensive.
Well, as an outsider,
Yeah.
we don't see the difference.
Yes.
So we see him as being the same as you.
Yeah.
Not the same as you know what I mean? Being on the same faith.
Yeah.
We see that, do you say Hizbat
Hizbut Tahrir.
Is that an extremist view? So the women on the video who say it's okay to hit your wife, just don't do it too hard. I see them and they've got head coverings like you do. And in my ignorance, I think that's Islam.
Yeah, which is, it's such a pity that people would just assume, like, this is a big part of, I think, the problem in the way Muslims are thought about is that we are a monolith. People cannot just, they see one person say something, normally something terrible because that's why it's in the media, and think, well, they must all believe that, which is why there's this constant call whenever anything terrible happens, whenever any Muslim does anything, there's this constant call, just like people will come to me and say, well, why haven't you condemned X yet? And the assumption within that is, if you haven't, then by default you must support it.
Yeah, I know what you mean about that, but I respectfully disagree. I think it's about needing to be educated that you don't secretly think that.
But how many times do I have to say it? If I've already said it 15 times.
But the thing about the hitting and the whatever, I've never heard, I don't mean like ISIS every time ISIS does anything you need to. But the thing with his but whatever, I'm like, oh my goodness, I was as shocked by that as anyone was. Yeah. And I don't know that is a type of extreme group and that they're just, I don't know that. Yeah. So to me, I think it's part of and yes, it's annoying. You have to constantly educate everyone about your religion and your faith, but I needed to know I straight away looked to what you think, because I think of you as am I correct in thinking of you as a moderate Muslim? And is that a loaded term?
It is a very loaded term.
Yeah.
It is a very loaded term.
Because does it mean you're a bit fake?
Yeah, it often, it's interesting to see where the term is used. So often it's used by people who, it's like, you're the Muslim that doesn't scare us. But also think of the term moderate.
But that's also true.
But imagine if I said to you, Mia, you're a moderate intellect or you're a moderate beauty. How does that sound? Does that make you feel good about yourself?
Pretty fair.
But what it's implying is if you're not, because if you're too Muslim, then you're bad.
Yeah.
It's so, if you're really Muslim, that's when it's a problem, so long as you don't embrace your faith too fully.
But if you said to me, I'm a moderate feminist, how would I feel about that? Well, I would understand that there is a spectrum of feminism.
Yes.
And I would be quite comfortable being described as that, because I would interpret it as being, okay, I'm not in the extreme. I'm not in the extreme. I am moderate mainstream.
Yes.
But for you, it's got different connotations because it questions your faith and the legitimacy of your faith.
Yeah, and it's also just what that moderate is often used as a term to mean palatable. You're the palatable Muslim.
But you are. But you are, because you don't advocate for all the parts of Islam that we find challenging and in some cases horrifying, like genital mutilation or hitting your wife or those things, or some of the extreme things that are done in the name of Islam, rightly or wrongly,
then I guess, but my unease with it is that I would prefer to be described as an orthodox or mainstream or traditional Muslim, because that is what the Islam that I practice. But when people keep articulating moderate, what they're really saying is it's kind of that watered down version of Islam.
So mainstream is a better word to use.
Exactly. Yeah, I would think so.
Orthodox. I know that means too extreme.
Exactly. And I know, I mean,
like Orthodox Jews.
Well, that's the thing. I think it comes with an overlay from other religious traditions that people have. But we would see it as someone who has Orthodox views just does mean mainstream accepted Muslim views.
And can you say that your views are mainstream when there are countries that are massive that have much more extreme interpretations of see, now I'm going to get that wrong. I'm going to say extreme interpretations.
No, but that's okay. I know what you're getting at.
Unpalatable interpretations where women can't drive or must be,
Well, I guess the tricky thing is,
are the numbers on your side?
Well, how do you know the numbers for 1.6 billion people? There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world who live in very different countries. And you've also got to remember that when we see religion being practiced in these different places, it's not being practiced in isolation. So many other things impact: poverty, education levels, corruption in the government. All these things impact on what we see as the Islam that they're practicing. So you will often find the religion is often wielded as very much a political tool. It's used to crush dissent in countries. It's used to crush women. Opposition. Look at just what happened recently with the blasphemy laws that in Malaysia. A Christian politician has been jailed for blasphemy. It's been widely argued outside that this was something that was done purely politically to stifle dissent, but they put the blasphemy law over it because it's very much more palatable in that way. So you've got to remember, when we say, well, what do 1.6 billion Muslims think about anything, even their way of the role religion has in what they think about women's rights is not always going to be the top of the thing. Here's a really interesting example I found when I was researching for my book about how it can be problematic to try to fix things with a religious argument. So in Nigeria, there was a problem, and there is still a problem, with girls being taken out of school, young girls being taken out of school and being married off very young, against their will, obviously. And so this campaign was created to try to make the religious arguments as to why that shouldn't happen. And so all these things were written up about men, religiously your girls have the right to be educated. Forced marriage is totally against Islam, and here are the justifications. Bang, 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 bang. And they even said to men, religiously your wife doesn't have to do any housework, so you should be giving her a maid. They gave these beautiful, impeccable religious arguments. It didn't have an impact. And the reason was this wasn't a religious problem. This was a problem of poverty. They were not sending their girls to school because they needed their kids at home to work in the fields or try to make money for the family. They were getting rid of their daughters to early marriage because they couldn't afford to feed them. So you could give them, men who are in entrenched poverty, you can tell him he should be giving his wife a maid because it's her religious right not to do housework. How's he going to provide for that? So you can give all the religious arguments you want in the world. That will not fix something if it's not a religious problem or not a wholly religious problem. And in fact, by doing it in that situation was really unfair to the men because it made it a personal problem as opposed to a statewide problem where the government should have been helping and say, well, what can we do to improve the situation?
You wrote a fantastic piece, a really interesting piece, I thought, in the Saturday paper after the Islam feminism, Yasmin's first controversy that blew up. And you talked about this idea of the palatable Muslim, and you talked about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and you and I have had not disagreement, but I didn't realise that saying that I supported Ayaan Hirsi Ali was so inherently insulting to you and your faith. You said about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who is the Somalian-born refugee who speaks out. She's renounced her faith and speaks out very strongly against Islam, but from what I understood to be from the way Islam is used to oppress women. That was what I understood of her position. Anyway, you said she's probably the most popular Muslim to many in Australia, that an ex-Muslim who travels the world telling people how dreadful Islam is can be the only acceptable kind of Muslim. I thought I learned a lot from what you said in that the only Muslim we like is someone
Who's not Muslim?
who's not Muslim.
And tells everyone Islam's terrible.
But see, I saw her as a moderate Muslim. I saw her as being like you, who talks about, who speaks up against the parts of Islam that are abhorrent, like genital mutilation.
Yeah, but,
and,
okay, yeah, go on. Yep.
And forced marriage, but is still a feminist. No, come on now, argue.
Yeah. Well, she and I are very different because she calls Islam a nihilistic cult of death. That is how she describes Islam. They are her words.
Right.
So imagine, best way I could say to you, Mia, is imagine if I said to you, I'm really eager to learn about Judaism, and I've read this great book by this ex-Jew, and she calls Judaism a nihilistic cult of death, and I've really learnt so much from her. She really cares about Jewish women. Would you be like, that's excellent? Or would you go, I think there might be other women you should be listening to?
Yeah, it's funny. I took the bits that I wanted to hear, and I didn't see her as... I saw her as writing off the abhorrent parts, but
she writes off the
all
whole
of it,
part.
the whole part.
The whole part.
So I guess the people who challenge you, like the man in the printing store, to come back to him for a second, there are people who would be confused that you could call yourself the same thing and adhere to the same faith that has female genital mutilation in it. You must hear this. So how do you argue that? Like, again, it's not really a question, and I'll do an analogy of my own. Is it like saying Catholics are of the same faith that the pedophiles who abused kids are, so how can they be Catholic?
Yeah, that is a good analogy. It is, and also it's important that FGM is not something that is required or even that's not a religious act. There are so many Muslim women who are fighting against FGM, and they will use religious justifications or religious arguments to stop it. But again, when it's not a religious problem, when you have non-Muslims doing it as well in certain parts of the world, the religious arguments will only take it so far. But I think the reason people can't get their heads around this is because they see Muslims as a monolith and they say Islam as a monolith. So they go, well, you're all the same. So
because you all cover your hair.
Well, because you're all Muslim, and there's only one. There's only one type of Islam, and there can only be one type of Muslim. Instead of, I think we can do it with Christianity in Australia because everyone knows something about Christianity. Everyone has grown up with a literacy of Christianity, even if we're not Christian. So we can look at what's happening in the Catholic Church and say that is horrendous. That's not Christianity. I would never meet a Christian on the street and go, oh my God, he's probably going to attack my kids. Like, of course I wouldn't. Like, it would never even enter my head. But I think there is so little literacy about Islam in Australia that people do see FGM or they see ISIS and think, well, that's all of them.
What I wanted to argue with you about when I read the Saturday paper piece, when you said, the only palatable Muslim in Australia is kind of a non-Muslim or whatever, and you were talking about the very anti-Muslim sentiment that was embodied by the pylon of Yasmin, both then and now again after her Anzac Day tweet. But I wanted to say to you, but your husband won the Gold Logie. Yeah. And he was nominated again this year. Lisa Wilkinson Koshi has never won a Gold Logie. You couldn't get more white bread Anglo than them. Yeah. How do you see those two coexisting? Because you are married to one of the most popular people in the country, no qualifier required. And he is openly Muslim. He doesn't hide it. And he has dark skin. So how does that sit with the idea of people being prejudiced?
Well, I think it's difficult to say this obviously because Waleed's my husband. So, it's going to sound
You're going to say he's
a
really nice guy.
No, actually wasn't. He's terrible. No, what I was going to say is I think I cannot underestimate the role Waleed plays in the media. Like, I can't underestimate that. And I know it sounds weird to say he's his wife, but pretend I'm not. Though? He is probably the only Muslim most Australians have had any contact with who isn't ISIS. And him just being there and just being a normal person who is occasionally funny and also seems smart and non-threatening, I think is plays a really significant role and in some small way does redress the balance. But, you know, he's only one guy and can only do, you know, so much. But I think he plays a really important role in challenging things, particularly because he's not there as the token Muslim. He's there, and he's really the only one I can think of that does that. Most of the time when you see other Muslims, myself included, in, you know, on panels or whatever, you know, we are there as the Muslim. And I get that. And I actually don't resent that. Like, people say to me, don't you feel like a token when you're on, I don't know, News Breakfast or whatever? But the reality is, for any minority in any, or certainly in any Western country, that you go from being excluded and unaccepted to being the token to being mainstream. Look at, say, Will and Grace, for example, was a really good example of, and now we have, you could never have Modern Family without having Will and Grace. And so you kind of have to go through that. Waleed is sort of the first one who seems to be there just because of who, as the token Muslim. And I think that's a really important role.
And what's the difference between tokenism and representation?
Yeah, well, that's
and
the thing.
tokenism and inclusion.
Well, that's the thing. And then if you don't have the token Muslim, people will be like, well, why are there no Muslims? So, you know, media can't win.
There aren't many Muslim women in the public eye. Yasmin's not going to be for the foreseeable future. It's been sad to see what's happened to her, which is a whole complex area we won't go into. But I feel like you carry a lot of weight. Do you feel that way?
I don't really think about it too much, and I try not to. I try not to pay attention to the hate and the criticism I receive, of which I receive quite a lot, and also don't really pay much attention to the praise and anything that I receive either, because I never want. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. Like, if people say, oh, thank you so much for your work, of course, you know, that's nice of them to say that. But I really try not to take any of it on board, because if you're swayed too much by the criticism or by the praise, you can get knocked off course. And so
100%.
I think for me, I just have to think, what do I think is the important work that needs to be done now? And whether everybody supports me or nobody supports me, what do I think is the important work to do? And then you just put your head down and you do it.
Dr. Susan Carland, what's next?
I don't know. I'm tired. A nap.
You must be tired. It must feel like many people have faith of many different kinds, but, you know, for few people, even religious people, is their faith and talking about their faith a full-time job, let alone defending their faith.
It is, and that's something I feel at times sad about, because being Muslim for me isn't a political identity. Like, that's not what it is. Being Muslim is my religious identity. And it's
kind of private.
Yeah, and it's a spiritual thing that's meant to nourish me and feed me. But the reality of just the world in which we live is that it's seen very much as a political identity, that me just existing with a headscarf on is a political statement, which is never what I would want it to be. But that is the reality. And so, you know, it would be nice if that weren't the case anymore. But it is. And then I don't feel that I don't get the right to complain about that. Like, I don't feel that if people want to talk to me or ask me questions, then I don't get to say, oh, I'm tired of answering questions. If I say that, then I don't get to complain about the paucity of the public conversation. When the public conversation is as bad as it is at the moment, then I think I feel a responsibility. If people want to ask genuine questions like you do, then you have those, you either have those conversations or don't complain. Don't complain that it's not going the way you want or that people don't understand.
I appreciate your honesty and your openness.
No, thank you for having me. I hope I answered some
One more
questions.
question. Will I ever get to see your hair?
You come to my house? Oh, maybe I'll come to your house.
Is it blonde?
What do you think? What do you think?
Do you colour it?
Yeah, I do. I do colour it. See, now you're going to say why.
No,
right.
that's
okay. Let me ask you this. Do you wear nice underwear?
No.
Okay. Well, I do.
Do you?
And a lot of women do. And you think to yourself, well, why do women wear nice underwear? Who sees it?
No, I
understand.
And
more people would see my hair than my underwear.
Well, I dress in ridiculous ways, certainly not for my husband and certainly not for anyone else. I do it for myself.
It's who you are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for having
my
me.
Love.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Text me a photo. It's sexting. It's Muslim sexting.
You're so funny. You're an absolute crack up.
What an interesting woman. You know, Susan Carland, I can't believe that she's still on Twitter. She is on Twitter, though. And you can only imagine what it's like for her on Twitter. And I often say to her, Susan, get off Twitter. But she won't. And in fact, for every horrible tweet she gets or every threat that's made against her, she donates $1 to UNICEF, which is a pretty extraordinary way. Talk about making lemonade out of lemons or polishing a turd. But her grace under pressure, and you can only imagine that wearing a hijab and in public in this current political climate is pretty intense and pretty unrelenting. You can't hide. So, you know, I studied her face during that interview, and they were all questions I'm sure she's been asked 1,000 times. I'm sure there were some really stupid questions in there, but she was gracious and patient and generous in her patience with me and my questions, because I feel like, you know, they're the questions that people want to know. Anyway, her book is really, really interesting. It's actually converted or adapted from her PhD that is about feminism and Islam. If you liked that interview that we prepared earlier that haven't dated, just download them onto your phone and you can listen to them when you go for a walk, when you're cooking dinner, when you're going, you know, driving somewhere, when you're standing in line and bored, when you're walking around the supermarket. That's my favourite thing to do, is just walk around the supermarket listening to podcasts, or take my dog for a walk and listen to podcasts. Some of our greatest hits are Samuel Johnson from Love Your Sister. That was incredible. There's an amazing one about the woman who has a one-way ticket to Mars. That's extraordinary. Roxy Jasenko is one that a lot of people comment to me about still to this day. They've said that interview with Roxy Jasenko, who is the PR guru and has had an extraordinary year with her husband in jail and breast cancer and her daughter all over Instagram. That's a really interesting interview. Also, Tracy Bevan, who was Jane McGrath's best friend. Oh my God, her story is unbelievable. And Nikki Gemmell. If you've read any of Nikki Gemmell's books or her columns, The Bride Strip Bear, or seen her on the Today Show, she is an unbelievable person to interview. She's written a book about her mother who committed suicide recently. Well, euthanasia, really, it was. And I gave her a bit of a talking to in parts of that interview. There's Lisa Wilkinson. Jackie Lambie was one that I loved. I really thought I knew what I thought about Jackie Lambie, but she's completely different to the person I thought she was, and I found that really interesting. And an interview with Aaron Elias and Jason Brunston, who are a beautiful gay couple who have had a little boy via surrogacy and have the most extraordinary story to tell about it. They were great. So you can hear all of those episodes and many, many more in the No Filter feed. Tell a friend. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. There's a little thingy in the corner of your phone to say share. You know how to do it. That really helps people find out about our podcasts and helps us keep producing them for you for free. If you want access to all the Mamamia podcasts in one place, please download our app, which is pink. It's called the Mamamia Podcast app, and it's in the App Store. No Filter was brought to you this week by our wonderful, wonderful sponsors at Telstra Smart Home. Speaking of apps, Telstra Smart Home is an app. It basically allows you set it up in your house. You can do it all yourself. You buy your kit and you just set it up. You don't need anyone fancy to install it. And you can choose your own adventure. You can tell it to turn on your coffee machine the minute that it detects you get up in the morning. You can make sure it turns on heaters or lights before you get home at night. It can send you a text when your kids get home from school. You can check on your phone to see that you turned off your hair straightener in the morning, or that you closed the front door. You can set up a little camera that's trained on your front door so that you can see when your e-commerce shopping arrives from eBay or ASOS or wherever you get it from. There are so many things you can do with it. You can really tailor it to suit your needs and your home and your family. It's Telstra Smart Home. It's a clever little app that lets you manage your home from anywhere. If you want to get in contact with us or suggest a guest, ask me a question or leave a comment about any of our podcasts, please call the pod phone and leave a message on 02 8999 9386 or email us at podcasts@mamamia.com.au. This episode was produced by Monique Bowley. Eliza Ratliff is away and we miss her. Hurry home, Liz. The executive producer of all our podcasts here at Mamma Mia is Monique Bowley, and the head of entertainment is Holly Wainwright. You can buy my book, because it's been a while since I've mentioned that I have a book. It's called Work-Strife Balance, and it includes wisdom from a lot of the women I've interviewed on No Filter, as well as all sorts of other helpful lessons from my 20s, 30s and 40s that will hopefully help you. So you can find out all about that at miafriedman.com.au. I am, in fact, Mia Friedman. I had a mammogram today. It was all clear, but make sure you check your boobs. Just do it now. If you're not in public, just give them a little squeeze. Check them in the shower. Make an appointment for a mammogram if that's suitable for you, if you're the right age. Ask your doctor if you are the right age. And I will see you soon. Lots of love.